Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast where we talk about real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined once again by Jeff Robinson and back from his trip to the South Pacific and all the joys in between, Edward Pye. Ed, great to have you back. I hope you had a good time away.
Yeah, wonderful trip. Took in a couple of different rugby countries there and managed to see some rugby, so it was a lot of fun.
It's good to see you again, Ed.
Good to be seen.
Well, we're going to begin with this week's episode with a trip to France. It's got a great many things going on. The top 14, the Pro de Deux, and, of course, the final round of the Sevens World Championship in Bordeaux. And Canada's women were taken to the field for the final time this season. Now, fortunately, from the results of round 2, Canada were confirmed to be playing in Sevens Division 1 for the next season, so that's all good. So now it's just pride on the line and how high you can get up that table. So we began with the pool games on Friday, and Canada kicked off with another win over Spain, 14-12. And then they followed that up with a 35-14 win over Great Britain. Going into Saturday, the final pool game was a 33-22 loss to the USA, but Canada had done enough to reach the Cup knockout rounds, and they finished their Saturday with a 29-14 win over Fiji. This had them lined up to play New Zealand in the semi-finals, and as New Zealand have proven time and time again, they can just be that step too far, a conversion too many. Final score 19-17 to New Zealand. And that meant that Canada was in the bronze final up against the team that they had lost to the previous round and already in this weekend, the USA. So the Americans knew that they could get another win, but Canada was like third time's the charm. And with 3 tries, all of which were converted, the final score, 21-19 of win over the USA, meaning Canada finished third. And on top of that, because of points and ranking differential, Canada finished third overall for the women's competition. So a fantastic display, a great performance, and right when they needed it the most. We talked at the end of last season that Canada is perpetually in this state of being the third best team in the world. I think we've all seen the Australian women sevens have just dominated this entire season, not just this championship. And of course, the New Zealand women's Silver Ferns are, well, they're New Zealand, obviously. They've got it in their blood. They've got it in their feet, in their hands, in every single position. As long as they've got the ball, you never want to count out New Zealand. But that third place is definitely open. And we've seen earlier this season that Canada maybe faltered during the regular season. But push comes to shove, chips on the table. Canada comes up with the bronze again. Jeff, what do you make of this weekend and of this championship 3-header season?
Well, just for the weekend, I guess the semifinal loss is a bit, I don't want to use disheartening, the word. But yeah, it's unfortunate. It would have been great if they made the final in that event. But overall, we talked about this at the beginning of the season, all 3 of us, and you and I talked about it last week too. We viewed this as bringing in a lot of new players in a cycle for the Sevens team, and finishing third, that's a great result for them. That's a great result for the women's team. Well done for them.
Ed, we've obviously got a lot of new talent coming in, and as Jeff pointed out, that was the intention of this season. We're still 2 years out from the Olympics. We've also now know like the qualification method that Canada have. They either have to finish in the top 4 of the World Championship series next season. Failing that, they will qualify if they finish top of the regional qualifiers, which will be the RAN Sevens. And failing that, It'll be the repechage tournament, most likely held in Monaco, as it has for the past 2 Olympic cycles. And, well, we've seen that the Canadian women can take it to third. But obviously, the men are going to be in a bit of a struggle, obviously going through Round 7s, Division 3 again. Should the men be focusing on trying to get into the World Championship, or should they be hedging their bets for the 2027 Round 7s and hoping to get top there?
Oh, I don't know which part. I mean, they'll have the the rational decision making processes out for that one, and I hope they've got a plan for that. But it would be whichever one is going to get them to the best and highest position that they can compete at. So you'd hope that they're continuing to rebuild, like they've obviously been through a big rebuilding period, the men's squad that is over the last year or so. So hopefully they'll continue in that fashion. You'd have to think they do well at RAN. That's when you've got your the teams there, sort of well down the list in terms of quality there. So you'd think Canada would do well there. But first and foremost, win what's in front of you. So I'm sure they'll be taking that approach. Just going back to the women's, I was just in previous episodes talked about wondering whether Canada has a mental skills coach or not. New Zealand just rehired one of their long-standing mental skills coach that worked with them through the 2010s in Gilbert Noka, and like was credited with a lot of their success through that period in terms of helping their mental skills. I was screaming at the TV when time was up in the semi-final. Canada had the ball. All it needed was a kick into touch, and the game was over. And they panicked a little bit and threw the ball to someone who was in a worse position. Nobody there to support. Ball gets turned over. New Zealand going for that winning try. So, whether that's a mental skills application problem or whether it's, just new players coming through and not having that experience yet. Hopefully they'll be better for that experience, and that's something that they'll be able to deal with a little bit more effectively in the future.
Yeah, something else to mention is that Jeff and I were talking on the last episode that a number of Canadian Sevens players had to leave the championship series after round 2 because they had their final rounds of the PWR. And, and it was explained that this was planned before the tournament began, that they would only be available for certain dates and such. But I do think it is a strong credit to the depth of this Canadian team that even with players such as like Olivia Apps, who have to return to Saracens and make sure that they're all in place for their PWR final season game and leading into the semi-finals and for their hopes final, that we have players able to step up and take their place and be able to, finally get that bronze medal that we've been clamoring on about all season. So I think it is definitely good signs for the women's team and the women's outfit as a whole. For the men, obviously, the disappointment of the Sevens Division 2 playoff is... It's a pain, but because of the way that the qualification is going to go for the Americas, it does look like the men have a better chance of qualifying through round 7s. But, we obviously hope that they can be the strongest team that they can possibly be, maybe even get a full-time 7s head coach for the men's as well. I know that Christian Esterhuizen has been doing a double duty so far this season, so maybe if that he's able to either focus on the 7s or the under 20s, and then you can make a strong headwind from there. But that is a Rugby Canada level decision, and I'm sure they'll be able to work it out in the time between now and the round 7s. So up next we have a bit more of tension because we're going to keep it with the women for the time being because recent news has come out for the rugby rematch tour that the tickets in Toronto selling like hotcakes. They are hot number. There are very few seats left, and so what's a fan to do? What's a possibility if all the lower bowl seats are pretty much sold out? Well, we open up the upper bowl, and tickets for that are available from as low price as $39 per person. So, a fantastic opportunity to go and see some real Canadian rugby. The World Cup final repeat, this time on home turf at BMO Field, or should I say Toronto Stadium. I mean, we are very close to the kickoff of the FIFA World Cup. And yeah, I think there's no excuses now. We all have to be getting tickets. Get tickets for yourself, for your loved ones, for your friends. Hey, get tickets for your enemies and see if they become rugby fans as well. But that is fantastic news, and definitely pushing the envelope of getting that largest attendance for a women's game. Maybe even push it for the largest attendance for a rugby home game, men's or women's. So, yeah, I'm hoping Toronto turns out. The GTA comes down to the Lakeshore and is able to enjoy that game. I think it's going to be fantastic for everyone. And, I mean, $39 plus tax. You can't really argue against that, can you?
Well,
But we do have some news from the Canadian men's side. So, according to Neil Davidson, the Canadian men are set to have 9 matches this year. And that means that they will be having the 6 games of the Nations Cup, which we already have got the dates for and who their opponents are. And it means that the PNC will be going ahead, but it will be a truncated version because there's only going to be 4 teams competing. And only 3 have apparently been announced. And that's going to be Japan, Fiji, Canada, and it's hypothesized that it is most likely going to be the USA as well. I think this is an interesting development, but we know already that Canada and Japan are facing each other in September. And that also then means that Canada will be playing Fiji as well. And it may be a case of similar to the Pacific 4 series, is that if Canada and USA are playing each other, that'll be a game that's held in the time zone of North Americas as opposed to where the other games are to be held. But the rumor going around as well is that there will be a central location for hosting, similar to the Pacific 4 series. So it'll be a case of, what I'm hoping is Canada hosts the USA in Canada, and then both teams fly to Japan to take on Japan and Fiji, and we'll get the results from those games. But hopefully it'll be the same as last year with Canada getting that well-earned victory and over the United States, which we all love so much. So yeah, I think that this is a pretty interesting development. Ed, what do you make of this truncated Pacific Nations Cup?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, you've got Japan and Fiji playing in the Nations Championship as well. So they've named, well, at least Fiji. I didn't see the Japanese team, but Fiji's named a very, very strong team, a team that I think would very likely dismantle Canada quite easily. Japan, you'd have to think, are going to be the same, given that it's nation championship rankings. Um, so it's interesting that they are truncating it. It's interesting that they are going to be where they're going to be playing them. I mean, I think there was talk this week or in the last week about Japan and Fiji joining the Rugby Championship. So I'm not sure when that's going to happen. If that's going to happen, it certainly makes sense from a sort of balance perspective that the two hemispheres would be balanced up with those 12 teams playing in two different competitions. So what that does to the PNC as a whole is interesting. Maybe this is a test run for that. But I mean, there's also the talk of the second tier Nations Championship as well, which Canada is due to be a part of. So lots of moving parts there. It's difficult to see what the future is going to hold.
Well, one thing that we do know for certain is who will be at the helm for Canada for the next few years, and therefore those games as well. Stephen Meehan's contract has now been extended till the end of 2028. And it was included in the Rugby Canada press release that this is to include not only the 2027 Men's Rugby World Cup, but also the 2028 Olympic Sevens as well. It's a very interesting announcement. Obviously, they are fully incorporating this idea of one squad, this philosophy that has existed with Rugby Canada since the beginning of 2024. It's obviously paid huge dividends to the women's teams, both in 15s and 7s, and they're hoping that it can be replicated for the men as well. Jeff, what do you make of the announcement that Meehan will be around till 2028?
Well, I'm glad he's been extended. Gives them a bit of job security in the sense of for the naming the squad and how the squad goes the next little while. I know last season was one win, 8 losses, I believe. So obviously, if anyone looking at a ledger, that's not a good result. But there were some positive losses, if that makes sense there. And the players seem to be more eager to show up and play for him, which is also a good sign, and that matters in this kind of an environment. That matters. So yeah, I'm pretty positive, happy about that. Still very interested to see what that squad will look like. Hopefully they name it soon. Be very, very interesting. That will really, I think, go a long way to show his standing in Rugby Canada, if that makes sense, with the players and stuff.
I'm interested in the combination of 15 and 7s because are they thinking that they like the squad, it'll be one squad, I assume, but are they saying that, okay, we'll name 30 players as part of the 15s and then another 10 as part of the 7s? Is it a way to contract more players into the Canada environment and keep them there for longer periods? Are they going to be moving back and forth from the 15s to the 7s like the women do? Like what any ideas on how that's going to work?
I would imagine to be the latter. I think that makes kind of some sense. I mean, there's some positions where you just can't go back and forth. But yeah, I would definitely imagine in that what you said there about going back and forth, like what they do with the women's team.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Jeff, on that. I think that if you look at the Canadian women's 15s and 7s, you see some players that are only ever going to be in the 15s and some players that choose to only stay in 7s. And then you have a good crossover of athletes to be given opportunities to, get some game time, focus on a certain subset of skills that maybe they need attention of, especially also keeping in mind if players are coming back from injuries and stuff, they have this opportunity to play in high pressure environments and really test their mettle. So I think it has worked really well with the women. Obviously, the current issue with the men is that they're not in Sevens Division 1 at the moment. So instead of having 6 or 7 confirmed tournaments each year, at the moment they are currently constrained to round 7s, which is basically the qualifier for Division 3. That's only one tournament, and then Sevens Division 2, that's 3 other tournaments. So even before we get to the Sevens World Championship, the Canadian men's team are playing 2 fewer tournaments than the women are. So I think that's the major crux. Obviously, the goal is to get the Canadian men back to Sevens Division 1. And, it's not going to be an easy process, but I'm sure it can be done. And if having players move from 15s to 7s gives them the opportunity, I'm all for that. Just to go back onto your other point, Ed, of saying that Fiji and Japan potentially joining the Rugby Championship. Well, there's no Rugby Championship this year because of this greatest rivalry tour. Although I do think that what should have happened is Australia and Argentina reach out to Japan and Fiji and say, like, all right, they don't want to be part of our rugby championship. We'll have our own rugby championship. We'll call it the Quad Nations. Australia will host just to save on logistics and travel costs, and we'll have double headers at Sydney, in Melbourne, and Adelaide, just to get eyes on the product and stuff. And yeah, we don't need your greatest rivalries. We're already good rivals already. We're having all these games, and I think that opportunity should have been extended. Obviously, Sanzar may have put their foot down and said no or whatever, but I do feel is that with this news of it's going to be a 4-team Pacific Nations Cup, I'm like, okay, it's between Japan and Fiji again, because there are 4 teams and 2 of them are tier 1 nations, and the other 2 are Canada and whoever else is joining us. It's not really going to be a fair contest, and yeah, and I understand from like Fiji and Japan's perspective, it's like if this is the only other tournament that's organized for them, then they're going to be sending their guys out to get the most experience possible. It's just, why does it have to be at our expense?
I would imagine that'd be a lot of B teams from both of them for those Canada and I guess USA games, like testing squad depth.
Yeah,
And
It
that's
is a
not-
good tester for them, I think, though. Like, I mean, Fiji and Japan obviously can have on days and off days. Both of those teams have been upset by smaller nations in the past. So, you know, if Canada can play to their potential, then there is a chance there. But yeah, it'll be interesting what kind of teams they put out, both of them.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to just wait and see on what will unfurl from there. Now we have some international signings. Jeff, what's the big news coming out today?
You're putting it on me. Andrew Quatrain. Well, he played in the Pro D2 last year and then suited up for, I believe, one MLR game after their season concluded. But he has now signed for Carcassonne in Fédéral 1, which is France Tier 3. Sadly, this team was just recently demoted from Pro D2, but they have eyes on just having it a one-season demotion and trying to get back to Pro D2 for next year. So he has been signed for the full season, apparently. So that's great news for him.
Yeah, very good news to hear. And yeah, you know, Andrew Cochin, friend of the podcast, we had him on earlier this year.
Yes.
And, you know, congratulations to you, Andrew, and wishing you all the best on your return journey to France. But speaking of suiting up for MLR, we have had the final round of the MLR regular season, and we now know what the playoff picture is going to look like. Out in front, to the surprise of no one whatsoever, if you've been paying attention to this league at all, it is the Chicago Hounds. They are the first team to go for a perfect season, play 10 games, won 10, 10 try bonus points as well. 50 points out of possible 50. And they have been sitting pretty at the top of the table for quite some time now. Following that up, it was Seattle versus California. This was going to be for the hosting duties of the second playoff. And Seattle did the business. They did what they needed to do. They got that win. They got the points needed. And they will be facing off against California again for the second round. And finally, in fourth, they did what they needed to do against Anthem. And Old Glory DC have made it. They are scraping by in the fourth and final team to make the playoffs. Speaking of Anthem, once again, another season goes by and they are bottom of the league. But it wasn't all doom and gloom this time round. They did finally get their long-awaited wins within Major League Rugby.
I would like to make a point of order here.
You may.
I would just like to point out that the only clubs that had no Canadians were the ones that did not make the playoff.
Yeah, it's almost like having Canadians on your team gets you to win games.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why Anthem took so long to actually get any wins at all. And speaking of which, it is not looking good for Anthem at the moment. Now, when the team was established, They received funding from World Rugby for a 3-year deal. That has now concluded. So the MLR is looking for new investors interested in getting them to take over Anthem. That doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be based in Charlotte, North Carolina. They could be based in another part of North America, most likely the United States. But, yep, that's what the Feelers are doing at the moment, trying to find where they can go, what they need to do. And the big story as well is that the defending 3-time champions, the New England Free Jacks, will not be going for the four-peat. They finish their season 5th. And in doing so, their winning run comes to an end. I think it was somewhat poetic that it was Brock Webster's try for the Chicago Hounds that pretty much sealed the deal against New England after his incredible performance with the team last year. He was, I don't know if he was traded or if he was a free agent who signed with Chicago, but he's been doing as great as we've always said he's been doing. And yeah, it's just working out for him fantastically. And what we always say, the team with the most Canadians always seems to be the one lifting the shield come the end of the playoffs. And, you know, it doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon.
What is it about Canadians playing for other teams that they seem to play their best rugby for other clubs rather than Canadian ones? It's kind of weird. I think it happens in other countries as well, but seems to be a real big trend in Major League Rugby.
Yeah, I've always said it's the team with the most Canadians in the final will always be the one who wins. And ever since the end of the Arrows, it's always been the team with the most Canadians seems to do the best during the season. And even in this year where Canadians have been treated as international players once again, it's the team that has the most, who chose to have the most Canadians on the roster has gotten the best results so far. I don't know what it is once they cross the 49th parallel, but just seems to be doing the job for them. So, but yeah, congratulations to all the teams that have made the playoffs. And so I'm going to reach out to you guys. Who is a Canadian player that you think has done incredibly well this season? Jeff, I'll start with you first.
Well, Webster is an obvious choice, but I'm not going to go with Webster. To be honest, I'll put him at number 2, to be honest, with a lot of respect there. But Mason Flesh, I think he's just dominated at 6 or lock, no matter where he played. He just dominated. I really hope to see him in Europe after this conclusion of this season. He deserves it. He just like scored lots of tries. He like lots of tackles made. He was a dominant force in that Hounds pack. And I think he's a big reason why they went undefeated. I would honestly put him at probably number 1. Honorable mention, very honorable again to Webster and Rumble, and even Kelly Martinez really solidified himself as a starting loosehead. But Flesh is my man of the season.
And Ed,
Yep, and a great line-out option as well.
Yeah. I was going to say, Ed, is there anyone else that has stood out for you, or is Mason Flesh head and shoulders above the rest?
Yeah, he's been very, very good, very consistent, very solid on both sides of the ball. Another guy that Jeff mentioned there, Captain Fantastic, Lucas Rumble. I think he's one of these guys that just constantly performs. He doesn't drop in performance, which, you know, hard on the body, but he is constantly putting in consistent and top level performances for the Hounds. That whole Canadian loose forward trio of Awaru and Rumble and Flesh, that's a high quality combination. Hopefully we'll see that for Canada as well. But they've got a really good balance there. You know, you've got some good ball runners there. You've got a great turnover player in Rumble, and then Flesh does a lot of those set pieces, lineouts, and those types of things as well. So those three together are a great combination. But I think you know, Rumble's one of the guys who constantly maintains that level.
Depending on the squad, that could be Canada's starting back row, depending on who shows up at lock too. That really could be. And then you throw Ardron in there too. Like one of those three guys got to go to the bench, and there's a great impact sub to bring on.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think Canada's back row has always been spoilt for depth over the past few years, and seeing that trio perform for the Hounds has been like a great treat for everyone. Which brings us on to the final question: who do you think will lift the shield? Or if that seems a bit obvious, what do you think the final two teams are going to be? I'll start with Ed.
Good question. I am gonna go with the Hounds, and I think the Seawolves. The Seawolves have more playoff experience than California, and the Hounds are the form team. So those would be the two teams that I'm putting in the final, and I'm gonna go with the Hounds to take it out.
And what do you say, Jeff?
Logic dictates that I agree with Ed there. I mean, like the Hounds have been so dominant. I'm just worried, like going back to like was it an NFL season where the Patriots won everything, then lost the final. I mean, wouldn't surprise me in a hookup because it's hard mentally to get up for every game.
Hmm.
But you would think they'd be able to. Just the Hounds just do seem to be a class above. Uh, and I would also agree with the Seawolves getting past, especially at home. The Seawolves getting past the Legion.
Well, just to be different, I'm going to say that the Legion rally together. They, after being humiliated in who has the home semi-final, it's the Legion that rallies together and triumphs over the Seawolves. You know, there's a lot of animosity between those two teams, especially when it comes to the playoffs and such. And California Legion, they're the team to make it to the final and lose to the Chicago Hounds. I think we all know where this is going. It's been the most dominant season in MLR history, and it's all coming into the Hounds playbook. They're going to be playing the final at SeatGeek Stadium as well. You know, no disrespect to Old Glory DC, but yeah, it's going to be. I'm going to say Hounds versus Legion. Hounds to lift the shield.
Yeah. Another question for you guys. Is this the last season of MLR? Especially
Ed,
with you
do
look
you
at
want
the
to
end.
answer that first?
Don't we ask that every season of MLR? Is this the last season of MLR?
Well, not at the end of last season. It took a couple months for us
Yeah,
to get to that.
yeah. I don't see anybody picking up Anthem, to be honest. Leagues are contracting the world over. Like New
Mm.
Zealand league, the New Zealand leagues are contracting. Australia, England, France seems to be the only place that's got their act sorted out in terms of how they run their leagues and the fandom there. That's actually what I was going to mention about Quattrin there is that, you know, that tier three division that he's playing in is bigger than a lot of the leagues
Yeah.
worldwide. So
Mhm.
he'll get some good quality rugby there, but I just can't see how in the world of economic troubles and sports leagues contracting and all of the different things that rugby has to compete with in terms of other sports and concussion and all of these different things that play into how the market's going at the moment, that somebody would pick the anthem up. So that then again makes it like, what do you do now if you're going down to a five-team league that doesn't seem viable?
Well, I've heard if it is only going to be 5 teams, there will be no season. That's what I've heard from
Mm.
source. I know we spoke about this before, Stu. I've never understood World Rugby's strategy with North America. I've never understood their strategy. I mean, like giving the 2031 World Cup, I think was actually a smart move to the US.
Mm.
I still think Canada should have got a pool. But I think that was a smart move. But why spend that $250 million to host tier one tests in the USA, which is not going to grow the game? I think they would have been better off interest-free loan, bankrolling MLR until 2031, trying to keep it afloat to like 10, 12 teams, build up the fan base that way for more local fans. But that's what I would have done if I was World Rugby. I've just never understood.
Yeah.
Yeah, the strategy
Yeah,
seems to be the only
I've never
strategy I
understood.
seem to see is that it's a sleeping giant. That's the word that's thrown around all the time, and it's basically just like if we stay here long enough and we make enough noise about it, eventually the sleeping giant will wake up. Well, it doesn't just work like that. You've
Yeah.
got to really work a viable business model and
Mhm.
get build the fans, which they seem to be doing in fits and starts, not with a concerted strategy. So.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, yeah, not sure if the MLR would be the way to go, but what they've done so far doesn't seem to be working very well.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe not next season, but a year after, rebranded MLR with like somehow the CRC, like in some form, like the Atlantic Privateers, the BC Bears, Ontario, what are they called now? The Blues again? Like
Yeah.
uh like somehow being involved or something like that. Like
Mm.
a super club competition, something like that. But
Hmm.
again, we need people to bankroll it on both sides of the border.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think having spoken to others more in the know of like running rugby clubs and such, is that like the big issue for North America as a whole is geography. You know,
Oh yeah. Always is.
when we compare with the exception of Australia, most of the other rugby competitions we look at are in a locale that has the same time zone with, and maybe the URC as well as like 1 2 hour time difference. Even Canada has 6 time zones. The United States mainland has 4. I mean, like half a decade ago, there was a talk of Hawaii joining the
Mhm.
Major League Rugby, which obviously never came about.
Mhm.
And so I think if MLR or whatever replaces MLR is gonna come around to, it has to be focused more on a regionalized basis. So we can have teams in New England, we can have teams in New York State, we can have teams in Southern Ontario, in Quebec, uh, maybe the Atlantic Privateers as well. For if there's a team in Maine as well, you can have that close proximity. And if you have that, then you're saving a load of costs when it comes to travel and logistics and things like that. And that, because that's what's really eating into MLR at the moment. It certainly isn't player salaries,
Mhm.
and that's the viability. And if you look at the English Premiership, or Prem Rugby as they're now rebranded, they've essentially gone into a franchise model similar to MLR. There's no promotion, there's no relegation. There's just 10 teams at the moment, and if other teams are to join, such as Worcester and Ealing, they have to be able to show that their teams are financially stable, that they have a stadium that will be able to house the minimum number of which I think is like 10,001 attendance, and then they can be added in a similar way that we've seen with North American leagues like MLB and NBA and even the NFL. And someone pointed out that there's now been investment in English rugby as a result. The most obvious one being Red Bulls, because previously there was no way they would have invested in Newcastle if there was a chance that Newcastle would be relegated and they get even less money from those games. But now that it's ring fenced, Newcastle are now the Newcastle Red Bulls and not Newcastle Falcons. And it's quite appropriate that the World Cup is returning to the United States and beginning in a couple of days' time from when we're recording, because I've seen a few essays talking about when the FIFA World Cup came to the United States back in 1994. And at the time, I think it was like the National Soccer League or North American Soccer League had folded a few years prior, but FIFA had awarded the World Cup to the United States, and they had it in 1994, and it's been described as the one that changed everything. And I'll leave that up to subjective interpretation, but one of the big things that came about from that 94 World Cup was that 2 years later, Major League Soccer came about. And, Major League Soccer, they had their ups and downs, especially at the turn of the millennium. But look at Major League Soccer now. There's 30 teams. It's nearly $1 billion to join a team. The entire league as a whole is pretty healthy from a North American perspective. Maybe not so much a Vancouver Whitecaps perspective, but
That's a weird situation there.
That's a weird, but that's more of a team situation as opposed to a league situation.
Agreed.
But the thing that got Major League Soccer over the hump is the mass exposure from the United States hosting the FIFA World Cup. And this is why when people say, "Oh, do you think that World Rugby should rescind the USA hosting the 2031 Rugby World Cup?" I'm like, absolutely not. This is something that will be the big exposure that can get people interested in rugby again. In the same way that the 2025 Women's World Cup was the big exposure of women's rugby that made people go, "Oh, this is good," and got sponsors to think, "Oh, this is profitable." And I'm not saying that the North American teams or the USA will suddenly have a team that can fight for the World Cup. I mean, I've seen enough American delusion to believe that the USA men's soccer team is going to win this World Cup. I'm like, whatever hopium you're smoking, send it my way. But it develops that next generation of fans. It's that big injection of viewership at a time that's suitable for North Americans to be looking at it, that it can be the catalyst that makes a big change. But maybe I'm on the hopium.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, I really do. I still think they're not leading into it right way of building that fan base. I don't think having one-off tier one tests in random at US cities is not a great model for that. But going back to your point about logistics, I do agree with you. Like that is a big issue for MLR. But especially for Canada specifically, which doesn't have an MLR franchise right now. Another one is also stadiums, infrastructure. Like we have almost no quality 10,000 seat stadium or anything like that. And that really is, like you said, with the English Premiership League. Right now, MLR, their goal should be hosting in 10, 12 seat stadiums. Sorry, 1,000 stadiums. And getting close to selling out. And to me, it was always a big red flag that there's other than Chicago, their attendance really still is not very good. It's only still 3,000, 4,000 for the successful franchises. After what, 7, 8 seasons? That's not a very good growth, I think, right, sadly. Getting on TV though has been a big step forward for MLR. That is one thing. Getting on, I think, was at ESPN. That was a good step. But you know what they say, bums in the seats.
Yeah.
You gotta sell that atmosphere.
Yeah, we talked about it with Maria Sampson, and we're already seeing that, as pointed out, Toronto's opened the upper bowl for that women's clash between Canada and England. And
got to be over 12,000. That's got to be Canada's largest crowd for a women's rugby game already. It's got to be. Yeah.
If World Rugby is not using the women's game as a marketing leverage, because the growth in the women's game is way exceeding the men's game at the moment. If they're not utilizing that growth as part of their marketing strategy, then they need to be replaced, because that is where a lot of the action is at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe it's women's rugby that's finally going to wake that sleeping giant. But again, it's not going to be soon. It's not going to be quick. And unfortunately, there's no women's rugby Canadian games coming up, although we do have the semi-finals of the Premiership Women's Rugby, and you can watch those games on YouTube. You can also get the Super Rugby Pacific semi-finals and the MLR semi-finals on Premier Sports. The English Prem semi-finals are available on Sportsnet, and the URC final will be available on urc.tv. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out more, as well as our written pieces, on our website, therougerugby.ca. You can also find our podcast on Spotify and on our YouTube channel, and we are available across social media, including Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and Blue Sky, all at The Rouge Rugby. Jeff, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on X at WPRugbyJeff.
Ed, where can people find you?
Facebook and X Rugby 101.
And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, that's where we're going to end this episode. Jeff, Ed, thank you for joining me. Ed, good to see you after so many weeks away. And thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Rouge Rugby Podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.